Cool. All right, y'all ready to kick it off?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Julian Martinez, co-founder and CTO of Natural Capital. Thank you all again for joining us today on this webinar where we'll be covering the intersection of the carbon offset industry and ag tech. I'm really excited to dive in today as we have our esteemed guest and Chief Agriculture Officer, Tim Dorsey, which will make his introduction shortly. All right. So to get started, I'll give you guys a brief overview of what we'll be covering today's session. We'll give an explanation on the carbon offset industry, the different types of projects, the current state of the market, and the future of offsets. Next, we'll explore the role that ag tech plays in carbon offset emissions. We'll also be highlighting case studies and innovations that we've seen in the space so far. And we'll continue on our conversation, the future of ag tech, data, and how it pertains to investment opportunities in the carbon offset space. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers today. As you know, my name is Julian Martinez, CTO and co-founder of Natural Capital. I'm joined here today by Christian Gustafson, CEO and co-founder of Natural Capital, and Tim Dorsey, Chief Agriculture Officer. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
Christian here. Glad to have you all with us, and very excited to get into really the core behind our organization and our efforts to monetize and digitize carbon credits and energy credits. I think the agricultural community is overlooked as far as this market goes, and it's actually one of the areas that I first started working in as a kid in Illinois, detasseling corn when I was 12 years old. And I, strangely enough, we started working together years ago, but to find out that we both grew up together and almost the same in Central Illinois. And Tim's family has one of the oldest running family farms in the state, and glad to have him on board. And Tim, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Tim Dorsey here. As Christian said, my family's been farming since 1824. Started into the ag tech industry in really 2012, but really started making a big impact in 2014-15 with a ag tech companies, and and the pattern behind my involvement in that was always transparency and monetization for the producer, and how we can take such a valuable resource and those that are the stewards of that land and get them into bigger market and a part of the ecosystem. So and looking forward to the conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thanks for joining us today, Tim. Looking forward to your segment. All right. All right. So we'll dive into the introduction to the carbon offset industry. So what exactly is a carbon offset? Essentially, the carbon offset is a way for a company to mitigate its carbon footprint by investing in emission-reducing projects. The basic unit traded in the carbon offset market is equivalent to one ton of carbon emissions, also known as CO2e. So by investing in carbon offset projects, companies can neutralize their own emissions and push forward the innovation in the space and drive forward sustainable infrastructure and project development. There's a couple of different types of offset projects that we see today. These are just 4 examples. We'll get into a few more after this slide. We have renewable energy, so what you've seen with solar, wind, hydroelectric, etc. Energy efficiency, which is going to be interesting in the next couple of years as it pertains to retrofitting of existing infrastructure and even up to smart grid implementation. So that's going to be an interesting one. We're working with a number of partners to understand how we can help cities like New York implement plans for retrofitting and how to work out the finance behind that. Next, we have forestry projects. As we know, forests play a key part in sequestering emissions from or sequestering carbon from the atmosphere, serving as huge carbon sinks responsible for absorbing millions of tons of carbon per year. And what we're going to get into today is agriculture. So green agriculture, or for a project to be considered a sustainable agriculture project, it means that they would be implementing certain practices such as no-tilling, reduced energy usage to increase crop yields, etc. I'll let Tim cover the rest of that during his segment. But these are just 4 examples of types of offset projects. There's a couple other ones, namely direct carbon capture, landfill gas management, and various other methodologies. So the word methodology I just referenced is from the process by which a project can receive carbon credits or carbon offsets. Once a project is developed to receive carbon offsets, they'll then be registered under a carbon offset distribution registry, such as Verra, Climate Action Reserve, or the Impact Registry. And these registries develop methodologies which carbon projects can use to certify their projects as removing carbon from the atmosphere. Here, what we see is an example of one of the projects that we've been working with Encina Wastewater Authority. On the left, you have an example of how we could measure the biogas emission reduction information through DMRV. In the center, we have an algae pool, and on the right, we have Gustafson with the chief operator there. Gustav, why don't you give us a little bit of history on Encina Wastewater Authority and what's happening there?
Encina is a really interesting case study for the purposes of driving renewable energy forward, because they are a wastewater utility, and I really don't like that word because water is not waste. It's a part of a cycle. It's always regenerating, never goes away. And so what Encina has been able to do is essentially develop a model to make them a wastewater utility that's essentially a power plant, because they're capturing methane and they're producing power that powers almost their entire facility. They can power more, but it's an air quality permitting thing, which is a whole other story we can get into, and we'd like to have these on at some point. But they've developed this model to where they're producing power, they're cleaning water, they're making fertilizer, and they're making money as a public utility. So they're consistently leading the way. We've done a lot of research there with algae bioremediation, so essentially using algae to take the nutrients out of the water once it's actually treated. There's still some residual nutrients that are there that are valuable for growing algae that would otherwise be expensive and require some type of fertilizer. So they've developed a rather successful integrative model, and they're right here in Southern California. It's been great to do some research and work with them along the way and see how, like I said, they've created a model to essentially turn a wastewater treatment facility into a small scale power plant.
Yeah, they've done some great work there. When we did our walkthrough, we discovered that they power they use 80% of their energy comes from the renewable operation. So what they'll do, renewable energy operation. What they'll do is take byproduct from the wastewater, flare the methane from that byproduct, and actually use that to power up to 80% of their facilities' operations. As it stands now, I think they're using around 2.2 gigawatts of energy just from that sustainable operation. And as Christian previously mentioned, using the biomass byproduct to produce a fertilizer that can also be used for whatever purpose they need to. But those are 2 examples of how Encina is already implementing sustainable practices into their operations. All right. Cool. And now that we have an idea of what the voluntary carbon market is as it pertains to carbon offsets, we can quickly dive into the advantages of a voluntary carbon market and the current challenges that we're facing. So firstly, the voluntary carbon market promotes awareness and understanding of reducing carbon emissions and the role of carbon offsetting. This increased awareness can lead to greater action and commitment to reducing emissions, and can also lead to more interest and investing in the voluntary carbon market as it pertains to innovation and sustainable development, and et cetera. And also, I think that we're at an inflection point in the voluntary carbon market, seeing how carbon offset is priced so low, and how the price that it should be priced at is so far away. So right now, carbon offsets are priced around $1.50. It's suspected that they could grow up to 50 dollars or more within the next 4 to 5 years, creating a huge investment opportunity, and honestly can drive the price of carbon to where it needs to be. If we're only paying $1.50 for each ton of carbon that's being removed from the atmosphere, doesn't really seem very fair for the cost benefit that this life cycle is kind of experiencing, so to speak. If we're going to say that the systems that we're affecting is only worth paying $1.50 for, there's a huge lack of synergy there, and I believe that we need to drive the price of carbon up. That's also one of the challenges that we're facing in the voluntary carbon market. A couple other challenges that we're facing is a lack of standardization. So the way carbon offsets currently stand is that they're classified by tier, ability to store carbon, vintage, and et cetera. And the discrepancy between these small modular details kind of leads to a divide in the voluntary carbon offset market. So you could be buying an offset that may or may not be quote unquote as effective as another. And I think by finding standardization, we can increase liquidity in the market and really create market participation. Mm-hmm. And here's another one that has been recently taken the spotlight, the unverified claims. So as we all know, Vera has found themselves in hot water through an investigative study that has found that almost 90% of their rainforest offset credits can almost be proven as phantom credits or not valid. Now, Vera has taken steps to rebuttal this statement and rebuttal this study. But however, this is not the only time that this has happened in the VCM. Gustav, would you like to speak to any of the things that you've seen here?
Definitely, and that's a good point you bring up. And we don't want to point any fingers at these companies and organizations that are either the registries or the NGOs that are taking part of this. But there's a lot of double dipping that's going on. There's a number of reports and organizations that you can look up on your own, find out. We understand that this is a complex market. There's a lot of variables, and it's difficult to quantify. But that's why we're here. We're working with our tech and scientific partners to develop a real-time registry that shows how sequestration is occurring and how it's occurring at different levels through different ecosystems and markets, and that's a potential game changer. So we want to build on what's out there, but then add our own expertise and the expertise of our advisors and mentors and colleagues to create this better integrated, transparent, real-time network, and to be able to allow more users in at the individual level, not just large companies, to partake in this market. So there's a lot that you can look up online that illustrates how these organizations, if you're buying an offset, say for a long flight or what have you, you don't necessarily know where that's going or what it's going toward, and there's not necessarily a way to validate, verify, track, and trade in terms of how we're looking to do that and give options, whether you want to do offsets through a coastal mangrove restoration or wetland forest or agriculture. We want to be able to reinvest in some of these sustainability projects, and particularly in the ag space. We've been doing quite a bit of work with our colleagues and counterparts in the hemp space, and hemp is shown to be one of the best agricultural sequestration sources that's out there, and it rivals that of rainforest as far as the sequestration potential per acre. So there's a lot that can be done, and as Julian had alluded to, with these different sectors and segments, there's different value for different types of sequestration. the real key is not only the amount that's being put in the soil, but the amount that's being kept there and for how long. So that's why no-till ag is so important, and some of these other things. We want to keep that carbon stored either in the ground or deep in the ocean, and those methods, various methods, have various values. So and we can dive into that a little bit more. But there's, as I said, a lot of double dipping that's gone on in this industry. There's not a lot of transparency, and those are some of the things that we're working to change.
Yeah, and on that note of transparency, what we're really here to do today is explain how ag tech has affected, not only agricultural operations, but its ability to improve the carbon offset market. All right, Tim, why don't you give a quick explanation about what ag tech is and your experience with it?
Sure, and part of this will be expanding on two of your points, really. At its basic, ag tech is really the digitization of farming, right? So allowing us to look within the window of our own operation from a producer side and say, hey, we're utilizing machine data, and pairing that with accounting systems and all the systems that you utilize within an operation and parking them into one data center. And it really opens your eyes to your own operation or the producer's operation. But then to take that a step further, what that really does is allow that producer to sharply manage and monetize their own set of acres, right? And to take that even another step further into the next trusted advisor, or the next person is able to utilize that data, of course, with the producer's permission, is keeping that transparency and allowing that third partner to help monetize some of the sectors that we're not capturing right now, right? So that's starting out as fuel efficiencies, fertilizer efficiencies, with EPA regulations and everything else. We're really getting smarter and smarter with our nutrient applications and how we really go about farming each acre of land. And what they've been able to do in ag tech, and I've been a part of since really 2014, was really geomapping that to where this set of 30 acres only requires this amount of population of plants and this amount of dose of nutrients, right, to conserve our bottom line. And maybe the higher producing ground, these several hundred acres, receive this game plan. So it's really evolving a model that's existed for a very long time and creating custom nutrient plans and custom farming plans, but really utilizing data to do that for us. And what that's really opened the door for is this huge data market, right? And companies like John Deere, Bayer, Monsanto, those guys really are data hungry. And really, to go back to the core of what transparency means, is protecting our data from some of those companies and leveraging that for ourselves. And while we trust third party partners to make the best recommendations for ourselves, it's really putting the power back in our own hands, right? And I think that's really where the carbon market plays into. It's just really the next phase, right? So phase 1 and 2 really were understanding what our data was, what we were even doing, right? And putting that into a model and understanding some of those, those different scenarios, right? And one of my favorite companies was a company by the name of Cropzilla. They really took that to a whole nother level where, you could plan ahead of time what you were doing and what you kind of proposed you were going to farm, those acres, and what your game plan was. And it really went through a scenario where, well, maybe that's the best decision, maybe this is the best decision, and this is what it does to your bottom line, right? All the while protecting your data, right? And I think when we're talking about carbon, it's really that same mentality, right? So understanding the practices that these guys are doing every year, and even last 5 years we can start to monetize, according to our capabilities here with NCC, and really taking that into a more visual level and a monetized level. And more importantly, as you progress into future years, you can start to plan not only what you're already doing, but maybe some ways to capture more of those carbon friendly activities. And that really, in December, January, every farmer out there is looking at next year's plan. And I think that's going to become more and more a part of the conversation, is how do we not only be more climate friendly, but also for ourselves monetize some of the practices that we pride ourselves on,
Mhm.
and put those in the open market to to companies that need those carbon credits, right?
Right. We don't want to leave that money in the field, so to speak, and
For sure.
and especially if we can reach back several years or more for those credits and provide that value. I mean, ideally, we're able to provide some platform as soon as they weigh in and offload at the dock, that there should be a carbon credit payment that goes there too. And taking a step back, just for everyone, and based on my experience in ag, and Tim, I'm sure you share the same sentiment. A lot of people see industrial agriculture as a big polluter, but farmers are the first line of defense, so to speak, as far as land stewardship goes. And in my experience, they're not wanting to waste fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides. They don't want to lose topsoil. I mean, these things are all expensive or irreplaceable in some cases, and they're very important in that. However, just the way that it's structured, and especially with these monocrops, there's some of these challenges that are tough to avoid, right?
Yes.
So we want to provide more incentives as opposed to penalties or regulations or taxes. I mean, that's really getting down to the heart of it, is just being able to provide these incentives and not leaving money in the field, so to speak.
Well, and that's a great point. And to expand on that, I mean, to your point, it's very easy to assume that agricultural producers are just every one of them millionaires, right? It's really functioning within a budget of really a couple $100 an acre. It really comes down to moving the needle. Even with selecting hybrids and things like that. I mean, we're moving needles by a couple bushels an acre, a couple dollars an acre, and they're very, very small margins, right? And so everything that you do is very impactful, right? So to your point, yeah, I mean, nobody that I have ever come across in my lifetime of ag has just, dumped tons of fertilizer and just ran with it, right? Because that's your biggest bill on the farm, is fuel and fertilizer, right? So those are two easy examples of ways to, become more and more efficient. And your practices is becoming a really big thing. I mean, we saw, strip till and no till come out of the 80s and really wasn't very well adapted until later 90s. And we're starting to see a lot of it now. We're actually moving into the realm of some very, very good agricultural influencers right now are doing intercropping, which is really, all of this in agriculture is really take a step back in time and just rehashing it and improving it. But that was really always a best practice, right? And we kind of lost that, in the 80s, when, commodity prices were down and you just really had to do what you had to do to survive, right? And the 90s, we came out with Roundup, and, to be able to spray everything was such a game changer. But now we understand that's really not the best way, not a best practice, right? We're seeing, super weeds. We do any research on water hemp and how that has transformed into just a unmanageable pest of a weed, right? But to take it really to where we're at now is going back into those best practices and understanding how we can monetize them in a modern era, right? and intercropping, strip till, no till, all those things. I mean, Christian, I know you can speak to this. You know, the USDA just released billions of dollars that they're inserting into sustainable farming practices, right? And I'd like to see that where that is, you know, pairing in the form of our subsidy system, right? You know, we're subsidizing crop. Why don't we insert some of those dollars into sustainable practices? And I think that's what's kind of happening. But that's the importance of companies like NZC is we're able to do that without, you know, the government reach, right? You know, we can help to monetize some of those practices that are already being done, or maybe it's a new venture for a producer. I tell you one thing, to totally shift how you farm into no-till and some of these things creates, you know, millions of dollars worth of equipment adjustments to do that in your operation. It's not cheap to do, guys. And I think to embrace every incentive or every opportunity out there is just hugely important for these guys.
Well said, Tim. Well said. And on your note about no-tilling and adjusted practices to make agriculture more sustainable, here we have a couple of examples. Tim, have you seen any more innovations in the space or anything that has really caught your eye as far as like, wow, that's a sustainable practice. You know, I'd like to see more of that. What have you seen so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, to go back to the intercropping, that's such a cool model. I really love that, and there's some really good influencers out there. I love to plug, but um, they, you know, are basically Constant Canopy is one, and I'll just shout it out right now. Look up Constant Canopy. Followed them for a long time. No ties to that company, but just really cool game plan, right? So where, you know, the model is to never have bare dirt, right? To always have constant growth, constant canopy, and there's just so many inherent benefits of that to your cash crop, right? Everyone, you know, functions off a cash crop, but some of those, you know, secondary crops are beneficial to not only the soil but to your cash crop. And you know, there's ways that we can monetize some of those nurse crops, I'll call them. You know, it's the same mentality of of how we, you know, 100 years ago, how we, you know, really got into corn hybrids and hay fields. You always had a nurse crop to kind of mother that cash crop in, and so that's a really cool one for me. And I know those are carbon credit qualifying practices. You know, the other thing, really, you know, getting into cannabis in the last couple of years, you know, we're really seeing some very sustainable practices there. And Christian, I know you can speak to this, but you know, when when we talk cannabis, we're either indoor or outdoor. Those are kind of two differentiators. And with indoor, you know, we're really building huge warehouses of vertical grows, indoor grows, and you know that comes at a heavy cost, right? You
Mhm.
know, big draw on electricity, all lighting in there because we're really playing God, right? You know, we're replicating the best scenario for that plant to survive
Mhm.
and be repeatable and scalable, right? Which is not easy with Mother Nature. So we're really playing God there. But to do that, you know, sometimes we're not the most sustainable, right? So in the last couple projects and really moving forward, trying to insert more sustainable practices there, whether that's you know, alternative energy, some of the waste, especially as we're looking global, where we don't have a lot of the regulations here stateside, you know, where, you know, you basically have to, you know, dispose of your waste. You know, globally, we can do something with that waste, make it a little bit more sustainable, and recycle some of those. So, um, you know, and when we're talking about outdoor, you know, it's really you know, focusing in on things that I'd love to see in ag, and we all, you know, as producers would love to see in ag that we just can't do because of the margin. With
Mhm.
cannabis, the margin's a little higher, so we can get a little bit more creative with our practices, and I think that's the future that I like to see for all of agriculture. And as we, you know, companies like NCC, as they increase the margin for producers and see an outlet for some of their practices and monetize some of that, that opens up that margin to explore some of these other practices that maybe weren't achievable or accessible before, right?
Well said. Well said. Yeah, and speaking of one of those practices, um, Gustav, you could speak more to this, but Rare Earth is actually releasing a salmon hemp feed that has received some pretty good feasibility tests. And yeah, just really understanding that hemp can become one of the sustainable agricultural products and how it can be used. Both of you guys, why don't you share your experiences with hemp and how it can be used for a sustainable agricultural tool?
Well, I think hemp is a perfect example, and unfortunately in the U.S. We shut down operations almost for 100 years on this because hemp was out competing the timber industry. You know, you look back even World War II, there were these vintage posters that I love seeing. It's like hemp for the war. They're making rope. They were making uniforms. There's all kinds of stuff, and it's really this incredible plant. I think of it like the modern buffalo, where you can use everything: protein, fiber, bioenergy, carbon sequestration, all kinds of things. And there's it makes sense why other companies wanted it outlawed and to have it being decriminalized and opened up, and having the U.S. Department of Agriculture really pushing it forward right now. I mean, this crop can solve a lot of problems. I think it can actually help provide a lot of growth opportunities for the economy, not just within ag, but in the other sectors I mentioned: proteins, fibers, paper, carbon sequestration, and among others. And as Julian mentioned, Rare Earth Global, which I'm also a co-founder of, and we've been collaborating on working through some carbon sequestration projects there, and we'd like to have the rest of the team on one of our future power lunches to discuss what's going on there. But we've received some funding for initial feasibility studies to essentially roll out a hemp-based protein for salmon feed, and it's very exciting right now because most aquaculture and most salmon feed right now is coming from a combination of predominantly soy, and then also all these other smaller forage fish, which are typically caught and used. These are key parts of the ecosystem that a lot of the other larger fish are eating. That's no longer being there for the fisheries, and in particular off the coast of Peru and South America, a lot of these fisheries are basically being decimated for the purpose of providing feed for fish, which to me that doesn't make any sense. If you're going to have aquaculture, you shouldn't be catching fish to feed the fish, right? Even though it's a different trophic level, but it's like there's a mass balance of protein and energy that just doesn't make sense from that standpoint. But because they can go off of South America, catch these, feed them to salmon in Scotland or Norway because the price is right, that doesn't mean that the practices are right. So so this is a tremendous opportunity that the team has been working on for quite a while, and applaud their efforts in doing that, because this is a revolutionary opportunity, not only for aquaculture, but the hemp industry in general. There's been this constant, I hate to use the chicken and egg analogy, but there's this constant battle between providing consistent pricing and meeting the demand for the hemp industry. So if you don't have the consistent demand, you're not going to have consistent pricing. And if you don't have consistent pricing, you're not going to have consistent demand. And it's like, okay, well, how do we change that? Well, we can change that by the company that's helping to support this study, that has a tremendous appetite for hemp protein in the tens of thousands of tons category. Not to go into too much there, but this is a huge opportunity to essentially have some forward contracts to where, as Tim was saying, farmers in December, January are starting to plan their year. If they can say, well, hey, we've got this offtake for X amount of tons of hemp protein, let's grow this because we know the price is X. It's going to be more than producing corn or soy, and comparing that to the current commodities prices. So this could potentially launch the hemp industry in addition to revolutionizing aquaculture. And it's a great opportunity that I think is going to have some promising results. there's still some trials going on, but from everything that we've seen so far, it's all very promising, especially as far as it out competing soy. So I'm extremely excited. Our team's excited, and as I said, I think this can both change the practices in aquaculture in general, and then also for hemp. So stay tuned to that, and we'll start having some more conversations as it relates to that too. But is there anything you wanted to add to, Tim, as far as
Yeah, and hey, guys, I can talk cannabis all day long. It's like you said, Christian, is kind of a wonder plant, and you'll hear that often, and always kind of raises a red flag. But I can speak to it very personally, and from a business side, I've been in industrial hemp, since 2015, and obviously, transitioned into med and recreational cannabis. But you know, with cannabis, there's just so many options, right? Aside from the carbon producing activities and best practices that go along with that, inherently in the soil, there's a lot of benefits to that. Hemp and sunflowers have really demonstrated that they can pull toxins out of the soil. And Google Chernobyl, right? They use sunflowers to mitigate some of the toxic waste that was housed in the soil, right? The big test study there. Same thing with cannabis, right? And it's just, after all those years of glyphosate and everything else, just a really good practice to be in the rotation. And then as you're building that soil, and as you're building best practices, that's another crop you can monetize, right? And we saw a couple rough years here domestically with the hemp market, and I think that was really something where the FDA really just didn't get involved with the federal legalization. And you really had just kind of a vast array of products out there. But I think going forward, those things are tightening up. The market has corrected. And some of my earlier points in intercropping and practices like that, you look at some of these southern states, Arkansas. I know I got a colleague down there. I mean, they're growing three crops in a year. You look at Illinois, Iowa, it's monocrop, right? It's corn and soybean rotation. You might have some livestock and some hay and wheat ground in there, but very, very small percentages, and shrinking as every year goes by. So having another cash crop in there is a big deal. But at the end of the day, it's really monetizing whatever crop that is. Cannabis is a good front runner to that story. But I think that's true with any crop. And really embracing what are the options, right? What can we do with this? Whether it be not only monetizing the yield off that crop, but what were the practices, right? And embracing some of those things that we see and other areas of crop production is really a really big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not to focus too much on hemp, but the other couple points I wanted to make on it that are really important is that, I mean, you can grow this pretty much anywhere, and you can have several cuttings per year. And our experience with or the Rare Earth team's experience out in the UK this past summer is a perfect example of how the crop was planted about a month late, just due to logistics and other things. As a lot of you probably know, the UK experienced one of the hottest summers in the last century, and also one of the driest summers in the last century. And that being said, despite being a month late and the hottest and driest summer in a century, they had a bumper crop of hemp. It's extremely efficient as far as its growing conditions. It's versatile as far as where you can plant it. Colder regions, warmer regions, really anywhere. And then the fact that it's very tolerant to these heat and drought conditions, and it's also it doesn't really need any herbicides because it grows so fast. It shades out a lot of the other weeds that might be competing with it, and very low too on the pesticide need, if any, as well. So those are some other things.
And that's a good point, Christian. So I mean, we look at crops like soybeans, right? That's a really good front runner. It canopies very quickly. The battle we're facing there is pesticide resistance, herbicide resistance, but naturally soybeans are really kind of a front runner, just like cannabis, where canopies quickly, they're nitrogen fixating, which means they take it out of the air. You don't have to put a ton of fertilizer on it. You look at a crop like corn, is essentially a grass crop, right? So it's always hungry for water and fertilizer, right? And we've gotten very advanced with our corn production now, but it's just that same mentality, right? Where when you're in a monocrop system, there's only so much you can do, and you got to just consistently advance. And that's not just the crop production; that's advancing the chemicals that are herbicides and pesticides. I mean, you look at like organizations like U of I and Bayer Monsanto. I mean, they're always working on something else to mitigate super weeds, right? And it's just really an ongoing battle. So it's really dialing in the best practices. And I will say, with a platform like some of the ag tech platforms I come from, or NCC, it's really opening your eyes to some of those issues and some of the ways that we can get creative. I think cannabis is a great, not to go back to cannabis, but I think it is a good example of what we can do with some commodity crops. And I know we've done different things over the years, but cannabis can really be monetized two or three different ways, maybe four or five, even sometimes, depending on your markets. But it's not just your main CBD or THC crop. You've got fiber in there. You've got a mulch factor in there. You've got the woody stem of the plant that you leave in the field and work that over, and that really traps a lot of the toxins of your field and work back in for biomass. It's a lot of those practices that we like to see in other crops. We just haven't had a good model to do that, right? And I think that's just because the margins are so thin, right?
Yeah, well said, brother. Well said. So really sounds like hemp and cannabis have a potential to become not only valuable but versatile in its applications in the carbon offset industry. And looking forward to more developments on the methodology behind hemp and cannabis, whether it be hempcrete and other hemp products as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to interrupt. I will insert one more thing going back to commodity. I think an important thing to note is things that are already happening, right? So that is going back to that best practices in no-till and strip tills and intercropping and things like that. But going into livestock production, I know you hinted on that early on. That's a really big deal, right? So you're seeing more and more commodity acres going to some form of irrigation and drain tile. So water quality is a really big deal, and a lot of producers are really putting in a lot of dollars to mitigate a lot of that wastewater, that drain water going back into our water systems. And there's qualifiers there. There's also qualifiers going into livestock, and again, dealing with wastewater, right? So it's almost two ways. So what do we do with the solids, right? We can turn those into fertilizer that we're putting back into the field, or we have a lot of great partners in agriculture now that are taking that and pelletizing them into fertilizer. There's a lot of great companies there. But then that those fertilizer ponds, those collection ponds, basically, what do you do with that wastewater? And we all have our own processes with that, but those are just things that we already do that qualify for some of these programs and some of this monetization that should really, we should really sharpen the pencil on, right?
Definitely. And one company that I've been up to their facility before, and it's called Metis. They're out of Central California. They're essentially producing hydrogen, renewable natural gas, and working on sustainable aviation fuel using ag waste from dairy farms. And
Yes.
It's incredible what they're doing. There's obviously a lot of capital expenditures up front, but the ROI on these facilities maybe 7, 8 years, and the facility is going to be around for 40 or 50 at least. So to be able to produce jet fuel from cow manure is something that they're hydrocarbons at the end of the day. It's just a matter of having the infrastructure to process those, just kind of like what we were doing with the algae biofuel and everything else. So being able to make diesel, jet fuel, renewable natural gas out of waste, going back to Encina, I don't believe in really the concept of waste. We talk about that, we refer to it because it's easy. But early on, a guy named Bill Blackburn, he was a sustainability expert for Baxter Labs, and introduced me really to this concept of sustainability and how it actually pencils out from a business standpoint. He wrote a book called the Sustainability Handbook. Bill Blackburn, check it out. It's intense and heavy, but it's worth a read. And he said there's no such thing as pollution. Pollution is a misplaced resource. And if we think about that, and we think about pollution or waste, it's still part of the market. It doesn't go away. We can't just separate it. We could throw it away, but it's still there. It's still going to affect somebody, and those externalities play out from air pollution causing asthma and lung cancer. There's still a cost. There's still a price to that. And like I said, that doesn't ever really go away. So we look at this as how do we turn this waste into a resource, and how do we monetize or incentivize these practices. So like I said, Ametis is a perfect example. Encina is a perfect example. The solution is out there, or the solutions are out there, and it's been very exciting and very encouraging to see that. And going back also to waste from livestock operations, there's two Scripps professors that I know, one very well, Dr. Dominic Mendola. He's been a mentor and advisor of mine for over 10 years, and his colleague, Dr. Jen Smith, she's more on the marine bio side, but they recently teamed up, and they're working on developing an alternative cattle feed that more or less digests better and it reduces the overall methane emissions. And they're using algae, particularly some macroalgae, similar to kelp, not like the microalgae that we were using for biofuel, but they're integrating various macroalgae into cattle feed that digest better, gives them a lot of additional nutrients, and ultimately reduces methane. So it's very interesting, and that study's been going on for a couple of years, but they're getting some very promising results, and all these things add up at the end of the day. There's not necessarily one solution that's all of a sudden going to solve all these problems. It's going to take a multitude across the board, and ultimately all of our collective actions add up, and whether you think they do or not, but I can tell you firsthand that they definitely do.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the best quotes of this webinar, Christian. So thank you for that. Reallocation or wasted resource, right? So it's a wasted practice, right? So and that's really the biggest thing coming from the agricultural side. Inherently we do a lot of things, and whether that's moving to strip till and no till or whatever else, some of those qualifying events. We do that as producers because we know, every motivation is to leave the farm better than when you got it, right? So, it's really such a long-term, or the way I grew up, such a long-term event, to do some of these things in hopes that, actually we take a loss and deal with a lot of these practices coming in the gate, and then we may see some overall soil health that kind of makes it worthwhile. But really, the motivation is the long term game. So to shorten that and make qualifying practices more more monetarily available, I think is a big deal. And I think to your point with Encina, you're seeing, this isn't just agriculture. I know we've kind of gone down that rabbit hole, and I'm easy to do that with, but you look at, even municipalities, like Encina's, or there's a company called Milorganite. So they make pelletized fertilizer. You can buy at Lowe's, Home Depot. That comes from a wastewater facility in Milwaukee, right? So I mean, it doesn't really start or end with ag. It's really all of us, and those qualifying practices in most every industry, right? Is just kind of understanding what those are. And I think the really cool thing that really brought me to NCC is coming from ag tech and that data transparency mindset is when you can get some of those qualifiers in a blockchain model and something that's transparent and trackable. um, there's a lot of safety to that. There's a lot of um, realization of what you have, where you maybe you couldn't put a pen and paper to that previously, and then also positioning yourself to a bigger market, right? And what do we do with that? Okay, so I see we have that. I see we're doing that. And we qualify, but what do we do with it, right? And NCC kind of really answers both of those questions, right?
Well said, brother. And one of the things that we've talked about previously with how data can be used in farming is the supply chain management. Now, Tim, you've said a couple of quotes. I can't remember it completely, correct, but you say something along the lines of like from seed to crop. How do you think, or would you mind sharing your experience with data management, whether it be through Cropzilla and Conservice, with your experience as it pertains to data and precision agriculture?
Yeah, I mean, I think data starts from day one, right? So, there's, in fact, a lot of what we did in these companies was really do a kind of a post mortem where we gather as much machine data as we could and really did kind of post mortem on what happened, and that's kind of our onboarding process. But
Mhm.
really taking it the step further is next year is really where that type of software shines, right? So whether we're doing the same program exactly, or maybe we're considering a couple different programs and really putting them side by side, scenario to scenario, and understanding, well, what's the impact not only on my bottom line, but also my time and all the rest of my resources that I burn through in a production year, right? And how do I be most efficient and respectful of those resources, and really seeing is almost kind of like playing a strategic board game or a video game. It's like, what's my next move, and what does that look like? And there's a lot of companies out there that are very good at that, and I always preach Conservice and Cropzilla, best in the industry. But they really were the leaders in that, and allowing us to visually see what we're doing and the impacts of that. And I think pairing that with these other practices, right, and using that in the same mentality as, okay, this is what I'm already doing,
Mhm.
and I can see the benefit of that, and NCC can facilitate some of the benefits of that. But more importantly, what do I do the next time, right? How do I got kind of a taste for that. How can I do even a little bit better, and continue to monetize that, continue to see the benefits, aside from money's not everything, right? So
Right.
how can I continue to embrace these practices that now maybe makes sense because I can afford to take the leap into that sustainable practice because there is an offset to that, right? So how do I kind of design and build and kind of gamify my job, right? My career here.
Of course.
And I think that's a really cool thing that's really taken off in the past 7 years, very hard. And I love to see this, the way the blockchain is going and carbon is going in the last, even year, really, to be honest here. I think it's really going in the same direction, and really embracing those early puts us at all of us that are participating on whatever level, at a significant advantage, right?
Well said. Well said. And can you share a success story about a project that you worked on that was driven by data informed investments?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, one of the silliest ones, or one of the first ones that I came across, was with Cropzilla, right? So, things like that you don't think of, like grain carts, right? And how they move across the field, and the efficiencies there, and the fuel that's expended there, and inherently some of the compaction on how you move that grain cart through the field. Because every time you run something across the field, you're worrying about compaction, fuel burn, employee time in the field. just those efficiencies. There were times where I think one scenario, I think the decision was, do I add another grain cart, or do I add another combine, right? And
Mhm.
that was really the side by side comparison, right? It's like, which one is most efficient, and what does each one do to my bottom line? And we were able to help that client make the right decision. And I mean, these things are, like I said earlier, even moving the needle like two, three, $4 to $20 an acre is just a really big deal, right? It adds up over the course of an entire operation, and to move a needle that much is a really big deal. And to do that is a really calculated approach, right? So, we've seen guys with Cropzilla move the needle 30 to $100 an acre, just on things that you don't even think about. But once you digitize them and get them in a platform and see side by side, this is what I'm doing, where, my family's been farming since 1824. We've had best practices and everybody does,
Mhm.
and things that you just do, but
Mhm.
you don't really understand the cost benefit of that until you really take it out of the pen and paper and into the digital space,
Right.
right? And allow the algorithms and allow the platform to do its job. It really opens your mind, and it's almost addicting, really. Once you go through those scenarios and that digitization, you're really hungry for more. It's like, wow, what else can I be more efficient on, or what else can I monitor?
Well said, Tim. Yeah. So I think the point he was going to make is, what else he can monetize on? Where else can we improve our crop yields and et cetera? So data is really driving the agricultural space, not only in the terms of helping farmers make more crop yield based decisions, but also in the form of helping them, save fuel, save on resources like fertilizer and et cetera. So with that, we'll go ahead and go to our conclusion. So what did we learn here today? The agriculture sector has the potential to significantly contribute to mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. Data is a key factor in shaping these market trends and making informed investment decisions. And there's a huge potential for growth and innovation and monetization in the carbon offset industry. Um, with agriculture covering about 11% of the emissions, it's a huge target to tackle. And we here at NCC believe that the way forward is through real-time emission data tracking through IoT and LiDAR. And we really hope to make a beneficial impact on the sustainable industries, not only as it pertains to agriculture, but energy, transportation, smart grids, and et cetera. So, Musa, would you like to add anything to the conclusion?
No, I really want to thank everybody for their time and be respectful of that. I think we covered a lot of ground. As I mentioned, some of these companies and organizations, our colleagues at Rare Earth Global, Encina, Ametis, Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and those that Tim's worked with at Conservis and Cropzilla. These are all future potential webinars that we want to have. If any of you have ideas or topics that you would like to hear more about or learn more about, please reach out, message us, and we'll keep this conversation going.
And with that, we'll take you to our acknowledgments. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. You can reach us on LinkedIn at Natural Capital Crypto. Visit our website at ncrypto.earth and email us at info@ncrypto.xyz. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.